All right, folks. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to the next hour where we're going to go through each one of the candidates for the NANOG Board of Directors. Elections are open now. If you're a member, you can vote through noon on Wednesday, so please vote early, vote often. You can change your vote up to 5 times. I am Ryan Donnelly. I am the chair of the NANOG Elections Committee. On the committee with me are also Dan Golding and Greg Dendy. He's down there. What I'd like to do real quick is just introduce the candidates for the board, and as I say your name, just stand up and wave so people know who you are. First up, Kevin Bloomberg. There he is. Hi, Kevin. Patrick Gilmore. Aaron Klink. Will Charnock. Paul Fischetti, who I don't believe is with us. Paul, if you're in the audience, please join us on the stage. Okay, perfect.
Paul Ebersman.
And last but not least, Paul Ebersman. All right, so rules of the road. Let's just go through this real quick. What we're going to do is have each one of the candidates make a 2-minute opening statement, and then we will go through Q&A with the audience, and Dan and Greg will be asking the questions as well as audience members, and then each candidate will have a minute to respond to each question. All right, everybody good to go? Okay, let's go and start with the candidate introductions. So first up is Kevin Bloomberg. You have 2 minutes.
Just speak. Okay, so my name's Kevin Bloomberg. I've been coming to NANOGs now since 2007 in Toronto in February. I don't know if you guys remember that, and I apologize for that weather. I have been on a number of boards, not-for-profit boards related to the industry. I'm currently on the Torix, Toronto Internet Exchange, and more importantly, I was involved in CNOC as part of the executive founding, as well as the treasurer. We run an ISP summit in Toronto, so I was involved in the budgeting of a conference of about 350 attendees, smaller than NANOG, but many of the similar issues that an organization like NANOG has. At the end of the day, I understand that there's a difference between being a member of an organization and being on a board of an organization. I have a number of ideas, but I also have a very open mind towards where knowing that the board has a lot of decisions that they have to make. While they're very transparent, there's a lot of things that a board cannot necessarily talk about through NDAs, etc. And I understand that I have to go in with my eyes wide open. I'm from Canada, so I'm the North in North American network operators. And I believe that having somebody who comes from a smaller background of internet provider, as well as having board experience that is similar in nature to NANOG, would be a good asset for the organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Charnock, you have 2 minutes, sir.
Thanks. I wrote a speech, but I'm not going to read it now. So my name's Will Charnock. I'm a current board member running for re-election. I've been a member of the NANOG community since NANOG 17, which was Montreal, Canada. I enjoyed it, even though it was cold. It's been an honor to serve the last 2 years on the board. We've seen a lot of changes. A lot of the questions that were asked when I ran last time were centered around topics like diversity in the industry. And I think we've done some things to address those things, those concerns. We've implemented, we've grown the college immersion program to bring new talent into the industry, to groom the next generation, one of the concerns that we talk about all the time as an organization. We're about to launch a new scholarship program that I worked with Jezebel Gilmore and Betty Burke on. And the idea is to provide an actual scholarship for 4 to 8 candidates every year that allows us to bring some additional people into the industry, some of the best and brightest, also aimed at minorities, trying to, again, increase diversity within the organization. As Kevin said, as a not-for-profit, our goal is to educate our members and the people that come to our meetings, and I think we've done a good job of doing that, expanding our base. If you look at attendance for these meetings, they've never been bigger. I've heard some people argue that that's not a good thing necessarily, but I would argue that it is a good thing. And so, yeah, I just want to continue the good work and hopefully serve out a final term on the board. So I'm asking for your vote. All the candidates are great, so I don't think we're going to go wrong on any of them. And again, once again, thanks for electing me last time, and I'd ask for you to re-elect me this time.
Great, thank you, Will. Next up, Paul Ebersman, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. So in the years that I've been involved with NANOG, it's changed quite a bit. It has definitely evolved from just being a bunch of router jockeys. We have, I think in the years that I've been involved with the program committee, done a very good job of expanding greatly what we've dealt with, data centers, peering, software, and I think we've also done a good job of not only growing attendance, but expanding the number of people who might not have wandered into a NANOG 4 or 5 or 6 years ago, and I've been very happy with that. I have also been involved with NANOG as a speaker. I have done the sponsorship, what used to be called the development committee, and I think that it's all been time well spent. NANOG is doing wonderfully. There are obviously things that I think we should be expanding upon. I'd like to continue to see some of the stuff we've done, like NANOG on the road, a lot of the stuff that we're doing with education and outreach, getting to folks who don't necessarily even know of us, much less feel comfortable interacting with our community, and let them know that it is indeed a warm, open, inclusive society, and that education is really, I think, the core of what we're doing. As far as experience, as I said, I've done program committee and development committee. I've been on the program committee at other conferences and done a number of talks and work at other operator groups. I'm currently also on the board of DNSOARC, which is a DNS-specific operator community. So I think that I bring a fair amount of experience in, and I would be very honored if you allowed me to serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Paul, one more time, if you're here, please join us on the stage. No takers? All right. Moving on, Patrick Gilmore, 2 minutes, sir.
Hi, everybody. I'm Patrick. The saying goes, if there's an elephant in the room, you should introduce it. My brilliant, amazing, smart, competent, lovely wife, Jezebel, is on the board right now. So just so everybody understands, I went out and talked to some lawyers, and there is nothing wrong with the two of us being on the board. I'm just trying to jump some questions there. There's a question, there's some recommendations around quorum, but there's nothing wrong. There's nothing illegal, nothing immoral, nothing in the IRS. We are not risking our 501c3 or anything like that. Moving on, I am a previous board member of NANOG. I was a primary instigator of moving NANOG out from Merit into its own corporation. I haven't been on the board for a few years, but I'm eager to get back and start helping out the community at that level again. I'm also on the board of the London Internet Exchange, the Seattle Internet Exchange, and the Peering DB. The London Internet Exchange I'm actually termed out of. I only have a few meetings left, and then I am not going to be a member of that anymore. So I have a little bit of board experience in the past. I've also been coming to NANOG for a very, very long time. A lot of you have met me or know my wife. I think you know that I spend a lot of time and energy trying to help out this community. I really care about what happens with network operations and how we can get people in, especially the newer members. I think the current board has been doing a pretty good job about lots and lots of things. I just want to help out with that. I'm currently CTO of an infrastructure as a service company. I used to work at a company called Akamai that many of you know. I've worked at National Backbones and even in what you guys call brick and mortar companies. So I have a nice wide experience at that level as well. But mostly, I really think that my experience with NANOG and the history that I've had with this organization is what's going to help me make this organization better, going from good to great as we continue on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. And last but not least, Aaron Klink, 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Aaron Klink. Yeah, I think the 5 people in front of me, well, minus one, have done a good job talking about the educational mission of this. So I first came to NANOG as a college junior, which was 1997, I think was NANOG 13, not to date myself too much. But I've personally learned a lot from NANOG, and I'm not quite sure that the kind of intense learning that happened 10, 15 years ago at NANOG happens today for new people that are coming. I think the college immersion program is fantastic, but I think I saw there were only 9 people at this NANOG as part of that. I think that can be expanded more. I mean, almost everyone in the room that I know of needs to hire people, and that's a constant struggle. And that educational mission can really help out with finding all of us really good employees. I'd also like to point out that when you're voting for someone, you're not voting for the program committee here. Like, you're voting for people who have a fiduciary responsibility to NANOG as an organization. I recently stood up GPF as a separate nonprofit org. There's a lot of work that goes into that. There's a lot of work that goes into the finances and perpetuating this fantastic org that we have, and it's multiple events, whether it's the main events or NANOG on the road. And I think we just need to keep in mind that we have a financial base that we need to maintain to keep this all going. One other note along the lines of bringing new people in, 40% of the people registered, actually something like 42% for this event, do not have ASNs associated with them. And some of that is just laziness where people don't have an ASN in their profile. But I do think there's a slant towards the operations and education in that community that may be drifting away, and that it's sort of the board's responsibility for strategic steering to look at that.
You got 2 beeps, sorry. Thank you, Aaron. All right, so what we're going to do now is move into our candidate Q&A section, which Mr. Golding is going for. So Dan, take it away.
Great, so I'm going to start out with a couple of questions, just to get things moving. Folks should feel free to rock the mic and to ask questions, but I'm going to ask a couple first just to get things moving. And some of these are going to be a little bit of hardball, because obviously I don't have to be on the board with you anymore. So, historically, the folks who have done best on the NANOG board of directors are people who've had a lot of financial or management experience, because this has grown into a big organization with a big budget. There are employees, there are HR issues. And this is not an election for the best network engineer, needless to say. So can each candidate describe which executive or senior management roles you've held, what was your operating budget, and how many direct or indirect reports did you have?
And just a reminder, it's 1 minute per candidate.
Yeah, and max. Kevin.
Start with me. So over the years, I've done a number of different things. Back during .com, I was, what was my title? Chief Technology Strategist. I was responsible for 12 people at the time, and our budget that year was $90 million. I work for a small ISP today. It's my own ISP, so I'm responsible for all of the finances as the CTO of that organization. But more importantly, I was the treasurer of CNOC, like I said, for 6 years. I was responsible for audited financials during that entire time, and the budget of that organization, while private, was fairly significant, in line with NANOG. So I have gone through the whole pace of that.
Okay. Will.
Sure. Over my career, I've had titles from network engineer to CEO. I've managed teams as many as 200 to as little as 2.
Will, could you speak up a little bit?
Sure. Sorry. Is that better? So yeah, over my career, I've had a number of roles. I've managed large teams, as many as 200 people reporting either directly or indirectly into me, or as little as a couple of people as my career has progressed. I've had budgets in the range of a couple of million a year to a couple of $100 million a year. I've got a lot of, I would say, executive experience and managerial experience, but I started in the trenches, like many of you, and just kind of grew out of the technical role and more into the management role. So I've served on several boards, both private and not-for-profit. I've helped raise millions of dollars in capital, and so I think I have that experience.
So I have done less direct managerial experience. I've probably run teams of up to a couple dozen, but I have been intimately involved with a number of startup companies over about 25 years stretch, where we did everything, including dealing with venture money, bank financing, insurance, HR, all of those little things. Most of them were smaller companies, so they were in the range of the probably $1 to $10 million range. I am currently on the board at DNSOARC, which is running in the, again, single-digit millions, but we have just gone through staff financing, salaries, fees for conferences and all the rest of it. Little smaller organization, but I think fairly relevant in balancing that culture versus money.
So, sorry. I have a C-level position now. I obviously have had teams that range. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not sure how to say it, I've never had to manage hundreds of people at a time, but many dozens of people, either directly or indirectly. I think the most I've ever had directly reporting to me was 13, which, by the way, I think is too many. Do not get that many. I've been responsible for budgets. I was actually thinking as I come down here, I'm not sure that the budget of the Akamai network section is public, plus I wasn't the only one responsible for that, but my current budget is measured in the high single-digit millions. I'm on the board of the London Internet Exchange, which is approximately, I'm trying to do the math from pounds to dollars, but it's approximately $20 million a year, something in that range. So about a comparable sized, call it, order of magnitude comparable sized organization. I believe that I have good managerial experience, both with people, and I've worked with HR, with finance, with lawyers, and all the rest.
Currently manage a team of 6 people on 3 continents. As Patrick, I can't really disclose the Netflix interconnection budgets, 60 data centers and 50 to 60 IXPs globally, so there's a substantial chunk of money involved. GPF is still a budget under $1 million. We'll see where that gets to as we may do events over time.
Great, thank you. Next question. What does diversity at NANOG mean to you? Do you feel NANOG has a diversity problem? And if so, how would you address it? We'll start with Mr. Charnock.
Sure. I'll adjust my mic a little. So diversity to me means a broad audience of people from all backgrounds and genders and races and whatnot. I think we do have a diversity problem in our industry. I became a father to a young girl a few years back, and one of the things I've kind of adapted my worldview to is that this is a very male-dominated industry, and there are things we can do to change that. It's not something that's going to change overnight, but it's something that we can put changes in now that affect the next generation, and I believe that's important. So yeah, I do think that there's a problem in our industry.
Paul?
Sure. To me, yeah, diversity is social, cultural, and technical, and I'd like to see us be able to expand all of those. We probably should class it as a diversity problem. I hate to use that word, but it is. We do definitely have a lack of diversity in all of those compared to what we could have, and that's certainly a goal to get more range of technical background, more social and economic backgrounds, sex, race, whatever you consider yourself and identify as a person.
Just to clarify with the candidates raising, what specifically you would do to improve NANOG's
What I would do, I think that we need to start reaching out to organizations and places that we haven't talked to before. I think that we are very good at preaching to the choir, but I think that we need to start moving out further to talk to other folks that are already doing diversity programs and seeing what they're doing that works, seeing if it works for us.
Patrick?
What does diversity mean? Diversity means a nice wide range of the cross-section of society. It's not that hard to figure out. And anybody who didn't recognize that there's not a lot of female participants is confused. The thing is, I don't think we should be forcing people to come to NANOG. My problem is, I honestly believe that the problem is that the people out there don't either know it exists or they're afraid to join. I mean, let's face it, this looks like an old boys club. There's 5 white guys up here. No women, no minorities, nothing like that. We need to make sure that everybody feels welcome to come in. So reach out to organizations like Girls Who Code. The Net Girls sort of sub-click of NANOG is a good start, but we need to reach to organizations outside. I do a lot of internships and co-ops at my organization, and we try to bring in a wide range of people, both religions and ethnicities and sexes, etc. So finding those organizations that have people that are not normal and getting them to come to NANOG would be a great thing.
Aaron?
Yeah, I think there's also this concern around diversity of thoughts, right? Is this one big echo chamber? Do we all just feed off of ourselves? Patrick stole my look at the stage view. There's actually 8 white guys on the stage with remarkably similar backgrounds, as you may have heard from what we're saying up here. And I think outreach is key, right? I mean, there are a lot of very capable people who would make very positive contributions to this community, to this board, to the program committee, to all facets of what we're doing. And they do need to be comfortable, and I don't think that always happens. And we need to, perhaps directly encourage individuals, like specific individuals, to get involved.
And Kevin?
So the bylaw change that is being proposed is a good line item start. It actually brings us in line with the Canadian requirements, which when we're in Canada we would actually have to follow, but it is just a line item. It's not actually an action item. It's not things that we're actively doing that we need to do. The problem is, as was said earlier, there's a whole bunch of the same diversity up at this front. And the biggest issue is putting our perspective on what we think other people want. And I think the reality is, for a start, we should not be making, we as in the non-diverse, should not be making the decisions. We should be bringing in advisors, even having board liaison advisors to help us address some of the issues with whatever the diversity issues they then are able to bring towards us. We're not perfect, we're not a political organization, but I definitely think there needs to be an improvement.
Okay. One of the interesting things about this election and these candidates is that there are seemingly many conflicts of interest that were brought out during the process. And these included folks who work for other folks who have family relationships, and folks who serve on other boards that are related to NANOG. And these conflicts have seemed to increase significantly this cycle. If you have any conflicts of interest, can you very briefly tell us about them, how you will handle them, and in particular things like boards, employment, et cetera? Let's start with Paul.
So I am involved with DNSOARC as a board member, which is yet another technical organization. And beyond that, I participate in things like the IETF and standards processes. I'm not sure that those...
Do you feel the IETF is a conflict of interest?
No, I'm just disclosing. I don't. Okay. I actually think that they're fairly complementary in that regard. Beyond those are things that are purely social. In my case, I have interests in food, music, various other things, but
okay. But please limit to conflicts of interest. So,
yeah.
so you said DNSOARC. Is there a conflict there, and if so, how would you avoid it?
The only potential, which I've already dealt with, is we occasionally collate conferences with DNSOARC and with NANOG. So when there's anything to do with a contract negotiation or something where there's any form of financial exchange, I recuse myself. And that's as close as I think I have to come.
Thank you. Patrick.
I started with Jezebel, just to make sure that there is absolutely not just any conflict, but even an appearance of impropriety. The only remuneration, if you can call it that board members get is that your conference fee is paid. So I will pay my conference fees, or I will get my company to pay my conference fees more precisely, so that there will be absolutely no conflict. I don't think she and I being married, neither of our companies, none of our personal gain comes from this conference, so I don't think there's a conflict there. I don't think my board memberships or anything on the internet exchanges is that important. The peering DB, maybe you could say that because they presented the peering BOF, there's some kind of conflict there, but I really don't think that's important. I am standing for the Aaron board later this week. I have spoken to the chairman of the nominations committee, the president and CEO, and the executive director of NANOG, and none of them think that that is a conflict either. Neither does my lawyer. So I think the biggest thing I can do is be upfront about everything that is a possible conflict, explain that I really am trying everything I can to make sure, and then recuse myself from anything that
Just to follow, Patrick, you disclosed your COIs, but how would you handle any conflict of interest that came up on the board?
Dan, we're out of time. Sorry. We have to move
on. This is a follow-up question. Please answer.
So like I said, I would recuse myself from anything that would be a conflict. I said that as it was beeping.
Okay, good. I don't think anyone heard that. Aaron.
Sure. So my boss, Dave Temkin, is currently on the board. So there's that as a potential conflict of interest. More than conflict of interest, there's probably just conflict. We tend to have vigorous discussions about things. Are you involved in occasional discussions with my boss? So there's that. I think the solution is anything that might be a conflict of interest, bring up with the other board members. If I need to recuse myself, I would do that. I also serve on the GPF board with Greg Dendy. I don't think there's conflict in the near future between GPF and NANOG that we would run into issues there, but if anything came up, I think we would recuse ourselves or find a way with the board that's acceptable to avoid conflict of interest.
Kevin.
So Torix, which I'm on the board of, has sponsored NANOGs in the past and probably will in the future. Very simple. I will bilaterally recuse myself, which is standard practice in that kind of case. In regards to on the ARN ASO AC, the NRONC with ICANN, I don't believe that has any direct relevance or conflict. I'm very used to dealing with conflicts from a fiduciary point of view, recusing myself, overly documenting those conflicts, in some cases on a per-call basis as I see fit, because I'm involved in the industry. But I'd say the biggest thing right now is to look at NANOG actually adopting a best practices when it comes to conflict. I feel that it's very lax right now, and really having more information as to defining what conflict is and not allowing it would probably be one of my number one things.
Have you read NANOG's conflict of interest policy?
Well, based on what I'm seeing on this table, when it comes to the elections, I don't believe that NANOG is following best practices.
Okay, fair enough. Will Charnock.
So I'm on the OpenIX board. I'm not intending to run for re-election, and that turns out at the end of the year. So in terms of nonprofits, I guess that could, I don't see a conflict, but I guess theoretically there could be one. I serve on my own board of directors for my own company. And then, like Patrick, I have a conflict with one of the other board members who I am now a partner with in terms of a startup company. We're both partners. You know, I guess the way I would handle that is if somehow there ever came an issue, I would recuse myself, and I'm sure Jezebel would recuse herself as well. And actually, we've done that, I think, in committee selections. We both stepped out of the room and allowed the rest of the board to handle committee selections because one of our employees was up for nomination for one of those. So again, I don't perceive any particular conflict in terms of how NANOG operates. The fact that we became partners happened after we were both on the board. So.
All right, thank you. What is NANOG's biggest challenge over the next 5 years, and what will you do specifically to resolve it? Start with Patrick.
So the typical answer is, well, we need to remain financially solvent because everybody's worried about the next big bust. Having worked with NANOG during what we called the revolution, trust me, those were much worse times when NANOG had literally $0. I think specifically, frankly, Ryan as treasurer and Betty and the rest of the board has done a fantastic job making NANOG relatively solvent. I think the other thing, and this is a typical answer, but I honestly believe it, is getting newer and more diverse people into the organization. So I think letting them feel welcome, letting them know that while sure, there's a bunch of white guys up here, there's a bunch of white guys in the hall standing around talking to each other, that doesn't mean that if you're female or a minority and you walk up to us that we won't talk to you. And I think that trying to find a way to make them feel welcome is important. So that's where outreach comes. And part of that is the educational stuff, but part of it is just reaching out to people who are already network engineers that are not coming and specifically inviting them to come, getting them to get here.
Aaron? Yeah, in my mind, there's a number of potential problems. Whether this is financial, whether this goes down, whether this event gets too big. I really think that the key is kind of maintaining the focus on education. I mean, this is an educational organization from an IRS standpoint, I don't think we want to get too far away from that because we could run into potential legal problems. I also just think from an event effectiveness standpoint, we need to stay on that educational mission and getting people in here to learn things.
Kevin.
So I was, well, that's loud. I was called out earlier today where there was a perception that I was running on the Make NANOG Great platform, and in fact, it was more along the lines of Keep NANOG Great. And to me,
it's Make NANOG Great Again.
right. Well, the point was that I believe that it is important to make sure that the ratio of sales versus education versus operator is realigned with an optimum balance, eyeballs versus content network type things, not through disincentivization, but through incentivization, bringing in more operators to counterbalance over time, bringing in more of the educational over time, because that is my concern that 5 years from now there will be imbalance in the thing, and that can be self-correcting, but I'd rather have us correct it through incentivization.
Will?
Sure. My mic on? Okay. So I see several challenges over the next 5 years. I think as the organization and the conferences have grown, managing that growth in a way that doesn't disenfranchise the people that are attending is going to be critical. I think that, as Patrick mentioned, we're on good financial ground. We set some goals as a board in terms of what we want to achieve in reserve policy. I think maintaining progress towards those goals is important. And I also think getting new and fresh content is getting harder. It's difficult to get people to come in and stand on the stage and open up the kimonos and talk about the things that they do a little bit. And I think we need to figure out how do we encourage more people, new people to come in and talk about new topics that matter to this industry as a whole. And then, I think those are probably the three largest challenges for the organization going forward.
And Paul.
I think that probably I would class the biggest concern as maintaining relevance. Right now, NANOG is a place where people who are doing interesting things want to come and present. It's where people come to learn about new things. And I think we've done a good job at getting a diverse set of topics out there. But I think that that's what we need to maintain. If we can keep more new people coming in, we can maintain the quality of our program and maintain the stature of how we are seen externally, people will find the money to come to this kind of conference. It will never be easy, but I think that the money will be driven by whether or not it is seen as useful.
Excellent. Hey, I wanted to take the opportunity to open this up to folks from the audience. In the finest tradition of NANOG, people like to rock the mic and ask difficult questions. Can we have anyone who's an NANOG member come up to the mic and ask something interesting?
This is your board, folks. Might as well ask questions now.
While you saunter up to the mic, do we have someone? No. While you saunter up to the mic, let me throw one more question in.
You got some. That's what I meant.
We got somebody? Yeah. Woohoo! All right.
Former chairman.
Let's go for it.
Hi, Steve Feldman, CBS Interactive, former board member. I wanted to ask all of the candidates what your opinion is on types of training that NANOG could do and whether it's worthwhile. In particular, thinking back to the classes that we tried to do a few years ago and the tutorials that we have now, can we expand on them? Is there a better idea?
Start with Aaron.
Sure. I think, so my team deals with a wide variety of ISPs in the Americas and in Western Europe. And quite frankly, a lot of them out there could really use help on basics of whether that's peering or how prefixes are distributed in their network or what they're doing just from a network practices standpoint. There are still a lot of people out there that could use the help. And I think on the content side, there are a lot of content and cloud providers that could use some help on how to best deal with all of these ISPs. So yeah, I think classes and tutorials that we really push as a kind of a gateway into NANOG is a really good approach.
So I've actually been fortunate enough to go to a number of NOG events outside of North America, specifically Afrinic and CaribNOG. And it's a very different environment when the RIR and the network operators work together. But that being said, I absolutely believe having 3 and 5 day class environment, basic 101, 102, 201 level of things would definitely benefit bringing in and incentivizing the new round of engineers within the industry, and then hopefully have them come back in. I don't believe it's really a cost issue, it's a time and commitment issue. Even a small stipend will cover the costs in not this kind of hotel for a smaller group to do that training. But that requires time and commitment, and I believe that NANOG should be up to the task to do that.
Sure. So personal experience, when I was a young engineer attending NANOG for the first time, I found the tutorials to be amazingly great in terms of giving me knowledge that made me better at my job. So I believe that those are extremely valuable, and I encourage, at the newcomers lunches, for instance, I encourage newcomers to go to those. There's a lot of information to be learned there. I think we can do more. Steve mentioned some of the initiatives we started. The educational track was something that we wanted to reboot, and so as a board we've asked the staff to go and restructure some of the initiatives that were started. I don't think we have any formal plans finalized yet, but what we wanted to do was focus on kind of the next generation of skill sets, software combined with networking skills. Our industry is evolving. It's not just about logging into a router anymore. Now you need to have some basic skill sets around software engineering. And so we felt like it was time to refresh that, and we're in the process of doing that. But yeah, I believe investing in that is a solid thing.
So I was actually involved with one of the attempts at developing curriculum, and I've done classes before. I think that there are a couple of pieces. NANOG on the Road, in particular, has been able to reuse material for certain standard tutorials like traceroute and Intro to BGP, and that's one of the pieces. Having material that we can use and reuse is not free and it's not easy to come by. The other piece is that you then need someone who can consistently present it. And we've had phenomenal response with people volunteering and being able to do that teaching. I think that if we want to step up our game, we're going to have to start getting some more people who are doing it more regularly and make it a more formal, and maybe it's we cover their travel expenses or something to get the people that we know are doing good training out there and keeping the material fresh.
Patrick?
All right, let me ask you guys, how many of you actually went to university to study something in computers or networking? Raise your hand. Okay, now, how many people just started doing networking without ever having gone to university? Yeah, so the thing is, there's a lot of people out there that never went to school, but there's a lot of people who did. So I think that we do need to continue on the track and educate, but my problem is that there's a wide diversity, I'm using that word again, of where the base level is. So I don't think NANOG should be out there doing, Cisco or Juniper 101, because first of all, it's going to take many days, it's not really our core, and there are other places that can do that. I think it should be stuff that's specific to an ISP or a CDN type environment, and then you should focus more on that kind of thing. Not saying that the other stuff is irrelevant or useless, but I think that that's where we can add serious value, because you're not going to get that at a standard training session, and you're not going to get that in your university skills. And there's lots of people out there that get in, and sure, we could teach traceroute again and get RAS up there, or RAT these days, to do it, but I'm out of time.
All right, center mic.
Yes. John Kristoff with DePaul University. First, thank you to all the candidates. I think it's laudable that you're all volunteering.
Someone who teaches for a living.
The question I have is, what specifically might, or what have you done, or what might you do to attract content? I know we see an email go out and something on the web page, but what more do you do, or would you do, or could you do?
I'd like to point out that that's not actually in the purview of the board of directors of NANOG. That's content generation and selection is the program committee. Can you rephrase that to make it more applicable to the board?
What would you do to encourage the program committee or advise them or guide them to help produce strong content?
So I'm actually on the program committee, and I have to say that having had breakfast specifically for that purpose this morning with the board does a phenomenal job of being distant but helpful and encouraging in regards to that. It's a very difficult tightrope, one that I think has been nuanced, and because of concerns with the community, that separation is important. I'm actually not, that is one thing I'm not concerned about. I do believe that the board should give the program committee some latitude financially when it comes to being able to bring in speakers, but that is a minor nuance to what I think is actually very well run.
Sure. I can never tell if this is on. Yeah, like Kevin said, I think maybe something that's not visible to the community as a whole is that we maintain a fair amount of distance between the program committee and the board. The program committee's job is to program the conference. I think what we can do is when there are relevant topics, there are things where we may reach out to the liaison to the PC and say, hey, do we have anybody who's addressing something that, maybe it's the cyber attacks that are going on or whatever. But we can, those are the types of interactions that typically occur between the board. And then we take survey data and we try to make sure that the program is meeting our attendees' expectations. So if there are certain tracks or things that are not performing, we may encourage the program committee to take a closer look at those tracks and determine whether they're even necessary or whether they need to be tweaked. So I think those are the types of things as a board that we can do, but because of our charter, we're very limited in terms of those types of things.
So one of the things that the board does is also decide who is ultimately going to be on the program committee from the candidate list. And so I think that beyond what we're all saying, and I'm on the program committee as well right now, and we had the discussion this morning, is yes, if they can give us guidance and support and financial support, that's great. But fundamentally, I think one of the other key things that the board can do is make sure that the program committee that's picked has contacts, goes to a wide variety of places, has a wide variety of industry and other contacts, because that's really where it happens. Sending out mailing list blurbs doesn't get us a lot of what we get. We get people who've either been to this conference or it's someone we know or we've seen somewhere and we think is of relevance to the community.
So I don't want to do a me too, but unfortunately, there's a lot of good ideas up here. I think that the board should be giving the program committee more financial support. I mean, there are some people that would make great speakers, but they can't pay their own way. So I'm not suggesting that we start giving honorariums, but maybe a hotel or a flight or something like that. I think that's something we should look into, but I can't say for sure we should do that because I haven't seen the finances very closely recently. That'd be something we'd look at as a board. The other thing is that everybody's up here because they know a lot of people. And person-to-person contact is the best way to get new speakers in. We all go to lots of conferences, we all see lots of things, so let's go out there and use our contacts to help the PC do the PC's job without telling them what to do, because that separation of church and state is vital, in my opinion.
I think there are strategic relationships that, whether you look at that as the board or individual board members, could have, whether that's with other conferences or with universities in their area. I mean, the board members, I think, tend to live in metropolitan areas, a lot of universities, a lot of community colleges, and I think those strategic relationships could be very helpful in assisting the program committee in how they can get deeper into that area. And I think that's some of the involvement that's perhaps lacking from NANOG overall, or that could be strengthened more. And that's, if board members have the time, I think that's something we can do.
All right. Any more questions from the crowd? While y'all think of something, I've got another one we've got pre-prepared. In this age of software development, SDN, how do we get new infrastructure network engineers involved in the industry and our NANOG community? What specifically would you do to help keep the router monkey alive?
And please, no references to existing NANOG programs. Saying, well, we do X and it's great is okay, but, what else can we do? Let's start with, Will, are you next? Will?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of an answer.
Okay. We can come back. How about Paul?
No, sure. No, I'll go. It's fine. Thanks, though, Dan.
Yeah.
I think, as I mentioned earlier, that it's pretty well recognized that the role of the engineer and the software developer are kind of integrating. And I think in order to attract that next generation of kind of hybrid developer and engineer, maybe some outreach is necessary. So going to, having Betty and her staff maybe do some outreach or partnerships with some of the software developer conferences that are going on would potentially bring new audience, new participation into NANOG. I think as a board, we're open to anything. We've always been open to any idea. It's a matter of where is your best bang for the buck going to be. And so I think just as long as we don't get locked into a method of thinking, as long as we continue to foster new ideas, we can continue to evolve and grow this organization for the best.
And one of the things that we have done, it's a logistical challenge, but I'm a huge fan of hackathons. There is nothing like getting your hands dirty in a room and getting folks to actually see something that works and that they did from scratch, or turn it loose and see what they'll think of that would never have occurred to you. And that seems to be a growing trend in a number of conferences that I'm involved with. I think that that's certainly one of the pieces. Getting back to some discussion that we've had with getting involved with your local university, maybe we come in to do a weekend seminar with some educational institution and get the guys who are working on coding with the idea that maybe they can play with network boxes.
Okay.
So I love this new SDN thing and DevOps thing. We had SDN in the 90s. We called it expect scripts. It was awesome. The thing is, it really, this convergence or whatever has been going on.
Hold on. That makes me like a NetOps software developer. Woohoo!
Totally.
Sorry.
So we've been doing this for a long time, and the problem is that we've slowly drifted away. When I started coming to NANOG, a very long time ago, all of the people doing router jockey stuff were coders. They could write scripts at least. They may not have had megabytes of code in a single app, but they did code. And that fact that it's separating is kind of sad. I mentioned earlier in the diversity, let's try something like the Girls Who Code organization. That wasn't an operational organization, but it has direct relevance to what we do. So sort of like Will said, reaching out to exactly those types of conferences, organizations, membership-based things. I really need to watch the clock more closely, is generally what the answer is.
Our next question will be on time management skills. Aaron.
Hey, you used my time.
He did. I was being generous.
It's funny because in like 5 minutes we went from, that's all part of the program committee to we all have a real opinion on SDN. So to some extent, I really, to a large extent, I think that's on the program committee for whatever the flavor of the next 5 years or 5-year fad, because we've seen this over and over again, regardless of exactly what it is. I just come back to, the board is here to represent kind of specifically the membership, and the program committee is here to program topics that people in the audience want to hear. I think we can look at this from a strategic perspective as well and try to get people on that. Quite frankly, I think we should just encourage vigorous debate. The PC is a little hamstrung because no one's going to get up and be like, I spent 3 years and $6 million and how many man years on this absolute awful SDN thing, and I'd really like to share this with you. I mean, I haven't seen that presentation yet, but I'm sure it's happening, right? And I think we don't have that debate going on.
Thank you. And
I think one of the issues is not really related to the programming, but related to how the organization interacts with the younger generation, I guess you could say. We're not having a debate about Fortran versus Perl versus Pascal. If you did that with a new engineer, the eyes would be glossed over. And I think part of the issue is that, my kids are using Snapchat. I had to learn what that was. It's up to us to be using the tools that the current generation is using when it comes to how the organization operates, how it markets. The marketing and the tools that we use in the conference need to be brought into the 21st century so that people are comfortable being a part of the community, that they don't get confused with whether we're using VI or Emacs. They're well beyond that argument. So from an SDN point of view, we need to wake up to what the technologies are that are being used and use them ourselves.
And I think with all due respect, we know Fortran won that one.
Pascal.
Yes, but COBOL won the money argument.
Question from the mic.
Hi, Chris Woodfield with Twitter. I was wondering if any of you had any opinions on, I would say, the balance of influence with with NANOG sponsors and vendors that come to the meeting. Just an example, we obviously depend on sponsorship to help run the show, but obviously the vendors, they sponsor because they want to sell things. I know on the PC, we do a lot of work to try to keep blatant marketing out of the content, and at the same time, it seems that there's a desire for the NANOG to try to keep this a vendor-neutral environment and an educational organization. Do you think that the current state of the relationship with our vendors and sponsors is at a point it should be? Do you think that anything needs to be adjusted?
Paul.
Yeah, so we've certainly done that tap dance quite often. I don't think that tap dance will ever go away. I think that people whose job in life is to sell things are going to push and sell things. And so it's up to us to decide whether that's a cultural fit or not. I think that for the most part, we've done a pretty good job of doing that balance of not having our culture polluted or changed, but gotten the benefit of having vendors involved.
The short answer is yes. I think that the split is actually fine. This room is sort of involatile. You get no vendor presentations, modulo Josh, but you get no vendor presentations up here, and the PC does a great job. The fact that the PC never talks to a sponsor is intentional, and I think that's great, and it should stay that way. I think that the fact that NANOG hasn't raised prices in 13, 15 years, something like that, is amazing. If they doubled price today, it would be still an amazing conference. So I think they're doing a very good job of getting the vendors in, the sponsors in, and I think they're doing a very good job of keeping the sponsors out of the presentations. So yeah, I think the balance is fine.
Aaron?
Yeah, I don't see any problem with it today. I do think you have to be very cognizant of what's going on to not let that line get crossed, right? It's the conferences who do provide slots for people and have that influence from sponsors, those presentations are awful, right? Like, we've all sat through them. They're really not helpful to anyone, and you don't want to get to that point.
Okay.
So I look around this room and I don't see one banner advertisement for one company anywhere on the walls. I don't see any of, well, other than ourselves, that's not a, but I believe there's a phenomenal respect right now between the sponsors that are here and the community. There is a very black line, I think. It's not gray. If it was gray, I think it would get trodden on very fast. And I would be very concerned about anything that went into a gray area. I think the way it's been done is excellent, and it should continue to be done this way.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the reasons I kept coming back to NANOG was because I didn't have to digest a lot of marketing nonsense in the general session. And I think we've been very vigilant as an organization about keeping that out of the general sessions. And I think as long, like my fellow nominees here said, as long as we maintain that vigilance and are cognizant of the community and what the community wants. They don't want to be bombarded with that kind of stuff in the general session. We get enough of that at our day job, and that's the whole point here, is we want to talk about how do you run networks better, what are the technologies and protocols and other things that you need to be cognizant of and implementing in your networks in order to be successful. And I think the culture here is such that it, like you said, there'd be a huge backlash if that were ever to change, and I wouldn't support it in any way. So.
Thank you.
All right. Well, with the last couple minutes we have remaining, I have one final question. We'll start with Patrick. If you could be any routing protocol, which one and why?
Any routing protocol?
There's not enough of them.
Layer 3 only, Patrick.
Oh man, you just ruined everything. I would be BGP because it is the protocol that controls all protocols.
Aaron? I have to pick a routing protocol?
You can be a copycat.
I was going to pick BGP too, but that's only because...
We're on BGP 4, dude.
Oh, good. Were you waiting for that? Was that a good setup? I would go with BGP because that's helping networks connect to each other, and that's pretty interesting. How's it?
Kevin?
So could be funny and say CDP is a great routing protocol for some of the older in the room, but actually BGP, the reality is I've been burned with so many other protocols over the years, and it's the one thing that just keeps on working.
Yeah, I think, my turn, right? I think you've summarized it well. BGP has scaled.
Was that a routing protocol joke?
BGP has scaled better than any of the other protocols. It has, it's not perfect, but it's getting the job done, and it continues to get the job done. And so I guess that's where I would fall too.
And probably just to be mildly contrary, I might consider ISIS because in large-scale backbones, if your routers can't talk to each other, BGP isn't going to do a whole lot.
Can I answer this too?
Okay, Ryan.
I would choose
I
RT.
want to hear there. What routing protocol would you three be?
Oh, all right, you two go first, then I'll go.
EIGRP admin.
Dan would be RIP.
Dan doesn't have to run for the
I
board.
was
He can
actually
say
about to
RIP
say
and move on.
EIGRP, but because it's the first routing protocol that a lot of new network engineers learn how to use or tricked into using, potentially, and it teaches them what a routing protocol is in a lot of cases.
And it's deprecated.
And it's retired.
Well, I'm old school enough. RIP v2 for life.
Old school, you should go EGP.
I would choose RTMP because it's old and chatty. All right, folks. If there's no one else at the mics, with that, we will conclude our candidate discussion up here. And I'll just remind you again, please, please, please log in and vote. You can do it via Big Pulse. There are links on the elections website, on the NANOG website, obviously. And if you guys have issues logging in, issues voting, please come see either myself, Dan, or Greg, or Betty or Val, or send a note to elections@nanog.org. Thank you very much, folks. Let's give them a round of applause.